Today's show is going to explore a passion of one of my friends, Ken Unruh, who is the past CEO of Magna Engineering and currently sits on the board. His passion is around building. It's the idea of engineering and looking at large-scale projects. Right now, in the economy that we are experiencing, there's radical uncertainty where we don't know day to day or even week to week where our next steps are going to fall. And it's very difficult to think big when we have so much fear. What Ken and I explore is the idea of recovering with the economy and how is that possible? So without further ado, let's get into the show. So Ken, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me and have a conversation. I know that there's a lot of great things that we'll get into today. I know from our relationship together, you have a passion for, I think we would both say building things. You are an engineer and you've always had this excitement when it comes to thinking through larger scale projects. But what I want to do is maybe get into your head a little bit and talk about where that started in your past.
Yeah, you're welcome for that, and thanks for having me on. Certainly, building is something that is very passionate of mine, and that I am passionate of. So if you go way back, you know a little bit about me, but I was born on a chicken farm in BC. And my dad was a farmer, as well as he self-taught himself to become a carpenter, building barns, homes, and became actually a cabinet maker as well. All relatively on his own and self-taught. He learned his whole life. He was continuously learning. And one of his mottos was, if somebody else can do it, I can do it too. So he would always try to do it himself before he would kind of give up and have somebody else do it. And the building aspect, being on the farm and being around building things all the time, repairing things and building things, you get a real, that tactile feel for mechanical things. And in my case, was a lot of electrical things that I would just tinker with. And my dad, being a builder, always loved to see construction sites and road building. So we would often travel to see our grandparents through the Trans-Canada Highway. And he would always tell us stories about as it went through the Fraser Canyon. Oh, you see there where the old road used to be? This windy little road down, near the water and steep hills and sharp curves. And he'd say, see what we're driving now? And you'd see what the engineers had done. They blasted the rock, built the tunnel. And he was always so impressed with and impressed onto us that building aspect of improving the infrastructure. Look at this bridge compared to what they had back there. And you marvel at this massive bridge they built. And you would always then get frustrated with sometimes when there would be lack of, there'd be roads that weren't being built up, weren't improved. And he always wanted to see that continual expansion of infrastructure, better roads and bridges. And I guess that's really the building aspect that impressed on me, because that all is what spurs on the economy, right? Better roads, more transportation of goods, shorter commute times. All of those things help the economy. So the government's role in building things is so critical to what has built our economy. And when the government stops building things, then the economy kind of stalls out, I believe.
Now,
so that's kind of where the building aspect. I think I got that building and industrial aspect from my dad.
With your father. Now, you went into engineering yourself, electrical engineering, and you have experience as a just hands-on as a leader, and then becoming the CEO of Magna Engineering. Can you talk a little bit about projects that you were part of there, and why these types of projects matter?
Yeah, so as big things have always impressed me. So first of all, I became a tradesman, electric motor repair. So large electric motors used in pipelines, in pulp mills, massive, thousands upon thousands of horsepower, and repairing those machines and seeing what those machines could do really impressed onto me, like the size of machines. And anytime I would travel the world, I would look where there were industrial projects like hydropower, where you have 500 megawatt generators, 1,000 megawatt generators being driven by water. It was just so impressive on me, those massive machines and the value, the economy that they open up because we harness all that energy. And so then from there, that it was the electrical side. Electrical engineering started with Magna, and working on high voltage systems. So in BC, we did the design on several 230 kilovolt substations, which were mainly used to capture they were used in capturing the water power on the Columbia River, the Kootenay River, and a lot of that then was being exported into the U.S. And it was, highly lucrative at that point in time. It was kind of during the Enron scandal when electricity prices could go as high as like $1 a kilowatt hour, right? And that was a big driving aspect behind these large substations that we designed and put in. And that was one of the bigger projects from an electrical side. Then also the oil sands. So I went into the oil sands the very first time into Fort McMurray in 1989. And from then on, I've worked in and out of Fort McMurray, sometimes months at a time. Always seems to be a project that I'm in and out of Fort McMurray since that time. So over the last 30 years, and I've watched that city grow. I've kind of watched the economics of the oil sands. I watched when they really started to expand. We were involved from a electrical testing perspective in nearly every one of those mega projects, and saw the economic benefit to not only the Alberta workers and engineers here, but also to engineers out of BC and Saskatchewan who came and to this day still work in those projects. So got to see a lot of those mega projects on the go. And I always was kind of, when I looked at our quality of life here in Alberta, and I looked at the amount of dollars being invested in that industry, and it created great jobs for people, I was always somewhat a little, I guess, frustrated or wondered why we work really hard here, but we always leave to play. We go to the Okanagan, we go to Phoenix, we go to Disneyland, we go, everywhere else, but stay here to play. We do some camping in the summer, and we look at that as being, our climate is rough and tough. But I've often thought there could be some big ways in which we could utilize our energy locally here to just give us more control over our own economic, through food production, through leisure type activities. And, my mind always looks at how we could do something locally versus, just working hard here it seems like in the prairies, we work hard. That's it.
We
right?
work hard in it. Yeah. We seem to spin our wheels, right? And just keep doing the same thing and the same thing and the same thing over and over again. Like one thing that that's coming up is, in the past, it was disruption. Like the idea that things are changing, maybe because of new technology and just trying to keep up with that change. But now I think that idea is almost gone. We've almost moved in this time frame to radical uncertainty, where we're just trying to figure out the next week, the next few months, and how it's all going to come together. And everyone's taking it differently.
But there's one thing that is there's several things, but one thing that's extremely certain is we need to eat.
Mm-hmm. Well, like that's what I want to get into with you a little bit in terms of just larger scale projects. Like there's a quote here I was going to read from the Premier, Jason Kenney, and he said that this is the most significant and disruptive economic downturn in generations. It'll get worse before it gets better. The government of Alberta will do everything in its power to protect jobs and job creators. The council announced today, chaired by Dr. Jack Mintz, that will provide advice and policy recommendations on how to best confront this unprecedented economic crisis and recover from it in the long term. This will include strategies to accelerate economic diversification. And this idea of economic diversification is something that I think everyone is looking at to help their economy recover, but particularly in Alberta. And we always kind of fiddle around with this idea and talk about
Yeah.
diversification,
Yeah.
but we never kind of move into how. So I know that you put forward a number of ideas to look at, how could we look at large scale projects? How could we think differently? How could we do things differently? Let's maybe explore those a little bit.
Yeah, no, that gets me excited, Scotty. I love talking about that stuff. So, I look at, in the past, so heavily oil and gas economy, we're going, how do we diversify it? Well, the world is going to technology. We need to have more software companies or, medical, and that's good. We need to push those, but I want to look at, like, business 101, entrepreneurship. You go, what are your competitive advantages as a people, as a geography, and do we have a competitive advantage in medicine? I don't know how. We could build one slowly over time, I suppose, by putting dollars into research and things like that. Do we have a competitive advantage in software? Um, Waterloo in Canada has developed a hub of software and research and schooling. Silicon Valley, obviously, that comes up every time. So our competitive advantage, when I've looked at it, really at a fundamental level in Alberta, here in the prairies, is we have energy so bountiful. We've got land like crazy, and we have lots of water. Throughout Canada generally has lots of water, and we've got the ability to grow our population. We've proven that. We've been the fastest growing jurisdiction in Canada over the last 40 years by a long way. Have beat every other province in population growth. And so if you look at those advantages, what can you do with those advantages? Well, water, land, and energy. I don't know, diversifying. What about food? We import so much food into Canada and into Alberta. Can we turn that energy into food?
Mm-hmm. And
that really gets me excited, because we don't have to build a pipeline to ship that energy, and we use it right here. We use that energy right here. And when I look at the energy, and we've all traveled into warm climates. Let's say Las Vegas in summer, 40 degrees Celsius, and you can stand outside those hotels in those covered like open areas, and they're blasting refrigerated air on you. And I'm going, that gas, for the most part, used to come out of Canada. Now, of course, the U.S. has a lot of its own gas production, but we would, ship so much gas down into the U.S. to cool themselves, and we couldn't even use it here to heat ourselves. So I'm going, why don't we heat our food growing economy with the energy that we have here? And that comes back to a real passion of mine, is greenhouses. Let's build greenhouses here. Let's build them by the square kilometer and produce food of every imaginable type.
Well, some people have said to me, if we can grow marijuana, I mean, is it that much a stretch to think of food production? But another part of it too is that equation. When you think of large scale projects and what's required is the how.
Yeah.
And when you were the CEO of Magna, you would have a number of different projects that you'd have to size up and see if they made sense, if they were profitable, if you had the expertise within your company, whether you could have the right partners assembled. So many different things come into it. And then there's the vision. How do you have people rally behind an idea so you can execute and do a good job at it? What's your process for executing on large scale projects? Because I mean, this would be, they're talking about diversification, but it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to actually go ahead and do something.
Yeah, well, exactly. And But I think what we also need to do is, once again, we look outside, we say, oh, other places have medical centers, places of high levels of, medicine research and software engineering and things like that. And what we have here, we want to bring that over here. But if we look at, once again, at our competitive advantages, we have a lot of land. So how can we make that land available to people who want to do something on that land? We look at how the West was turned into this, the breadbasket of Canada was through homesteading. The government just says, we've got to get people out into the prairies. So for $10, you get 160 acres. Your requirement was that after a certain period of time, I think maybe it was like 3 years, you needed to have it cleared and a crop planted, and then it was your land. So, as we drive through all the central Alberta and all of the agricultural areas, that was all, for the most part, homesteaded land. It was just given to the people. All they had to do was make it productive. Why can't we continue to do that? Most of the arable flat land has been, it's been taken over and it's used for growing crops, cereal crops, grains and things. But what about all those, there's a lot of areas that aren't suitable for land farming. Could we not convert those into and give them to greenhouse growers and just say, you know what, there's so much crown land in Alberta, make that available to the greenhouse grower. And the energy required, the natural gas, can be very expensive for greenhouse growing, cold climates. The people of Alberta own that natural gas. We own it. We can make it available to the greenhouse grower, to the company or the farmer that's growing that. I often look at what was done in California, where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers put out through massive water retention projects and canals and pumping stations, and provided that water to the farmer. You have a certain amount of land, you get a certain amount of water. I would imagine there's a levy that would be paid for that water and to pay for that project. But that water distribution project was a government project, and it converted those dry, arid landscapes of California into massive food production areas. In fact, Canada brings in $4 billion worth of food every year out of that California Central Valley. Why could that not be done right here?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can look at some of the costs, but let's look at that. Let's seriously look at the costs of doing it on a large scale. And just like we always look at how do we do green energy on a large scale, well, let's look at food on a large scale, right? I kind of did a little research recently into the greenhouse industry in North America, Canada, and we have right now in Canada, we have 20 square kilometers of greenhouses. 20 square kilometers. The US, because of their climate's warmer, don't have so much the need for them, but they have about 27 square kilometers of greenhouses. And in Canada, we produce in those greenhouses 700,000 tons of fresh vegetables. And we import about 6 million tons. So if you kind of look at that, how much greenhouse capacity would we need? Well, we would need about 150 square kilometers. We have already 20. Why couldn't we just seriously expand that capability right here in Alberta? It doesn't have to happen in 1 year, but if the government really put the framework into looking at the economics of that, free land, make the people's gas available to the farmer with a levy at production time, and water. There's so much water in Alberta through the Peace River. That's a massive river. We could utilize a lot of water for growing food right there, and just convert that energy, water, and land into food. I think it's totally doable.
The other thing that I looked into a little bit, and you probably have a better idea, is just the environmental impact. And as far as I understood, these greenhouses in vertical farms use less water than your typical farm where you're watering the soil.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you can have typical greenhouse growing environments where it's just one layer of plant. You can then do, like the vertical, the shelving component of it. You can even do that all with artificial light. I don't know why you wouldn't use some natural light as well to offset, all electrical lighting. So, so much, and the automation you can put into these greenhouses too, in the planting and the harvesting. You'll always need some labor. Once again, in Canada, the operating cost for greenhouse, 1/3 is labor. So once again, we've got the high labor cost, and we want to get our strawberries out of Mexico. Where what do you think the labor cost is?
Hmm.
So it's like, no, we can't. We can't pick a strawberry in Alberta for that low rate, but we sure will eat one that's been picked somewhere else at that low rate. We have to get around that aspect in our minds, and figure out the labor conundrum that we have in the West and here in Alberta.
It,
And
that also would factor into it is basically you would need, in order for you to be competitive in an agricultural setting, you would need lower cost labor. Would that be
yeah,
right?
or we would have to, we'd have to say we're willing to pay a lot more for the food.
Hmm.
And just to kind of give a comparison, so Canada imports $7 billion a year in fruits and fresh produce, fruits and vegetables, and the kind of the agricultural output of Alberta on the at the farm is about $5 billion, and then we add some value to that agriculture and bring that up to about $8 billion. So to give you kind of that scale, like we're producing now, in grain and meat, about $5 billion, $5.5 billion a year in Alberta. But we also then import 7 billion fresh fruits and vegetables into Canada. So that's kind of gives you the scale, the size of agriculture is a really big part of Alberta. We would have an opportunity to double that easy
Hmm.
just by going into, massive food production projects.
So the other part of this would be leadership and thinking about how do you choose to diversify? Like, how would you create the political will to make the change? And how do you break it up between private and public sector interests? And that also seems to be a large stumbling block, because people tend to revert to what's already been done and are fearful of putting in more, especially now where we need to make big changes to look at recovery.
Yeah.
But in a time where everyone's fearful, that's the last thing that anybody wants to do is kind of make a change. How do we create momentum behind a big idea, behind big structural change in this area? Say it's vertical farming or another one.
I don't have the answers for that one necessarily. You know, when do how do leaders come along? What creates the leader? You look back in history, and it's why did that leader exist at that point in time? It's sometimes I don't know. It's just fate, serendipity. Along comes somebody who, at the right time, with the right conditions, rose to leadership with the right idea and created something fantastic. Um, how does that happen? I don't know. You look at, was it some thought? Did people put thought into this and saying, well, somehow we're going to think ourselves and create this great leader? I don't know. I mean, I guess we can work on the conditions that create great leadership, but I don't know. It's a great question, Scotty. How do we get these conditions right where we find the leadership or have the leadership in place that's willing to make bold decisions and take great steps? You just look at Peter Lougheed, the policies and the vision that he had. He fought hard for Alberta. He welcomed the whole world to come here and help us extract our resources, our energy, and it created a population of 4.5 million people, when we can look right beside us is another province with very similar resources, and they're barely over 1 million.
Mhm.
So, why did that leader Peter Lougheed come along? I don't know. He somehow he came, and he was here, and he turned this province into what it is today. So I really like this Alberta Economic Recovery Council. I like that idea, with some high profile people on it. I think that was a smart thing to do. There's maybe some other things from a political basis that aren't always that smart, but I do like that, you get some minds around the table, some political minds, some business minds, there's some financial people in that group. And if that, group is open and to listen to ideas and then put forward and ensure the government follows through on it. Maybe that's how. Maybe the pressure from the people to make sure that this recovery council is pushed and that its ideas then are implemented.
Yeah, I think also it's the idea that people who are passionate about making change and trying to think about it from all different angles are willing to just speak up. And even if your idea is going to be challenged, it could be challenged economically, environmentally, through technology. I think it's still very important that we get these ideas out for debate so people can start thinking and just broaden our minds so we're able to take on the new challenge of our time.
Yeah, no, definitely we need to get these ideas pushed forward. I often look at, though, let's say you take the massive water projects in California that turned that into the state into the biggest food producer there is. Was that idea broadly put out to the people and debated, or was it just somebody said, I'm going to dam a bunch of these rivers off and store the water and produce food? Like how broad was that debate among the general population? I don't know. There was no internet. There was probably a few newspapers, but don't you think sometimes we need some leadership that's going to actually be smart and just move some ideas along?
Well, I think that what happens is it's the idea that sometimes it's the environment that will shape the decision, and then sometimes the leaders that will push forward a decision. And it's always probably a bit of both that
Yeah.
kind of end up making it happen. But even like, I want to thank you, Ken, for coming on and just chatting with me today, just because it's good that we open up and share new ideas and start getting excited about different things that we can do, especially in a time where it's so tough for so many people.
Yeah.
We need new ideas to help people out. So again, thanks so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that, Scotty. Can I just end with one more reiteration?
Mm-hmm.
Our competitive advantage in Alberta: land, energy, and water. Let's use it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.